Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons, and we're going to talk about the brand new Dungeons & Dragons Canon hardback, and that is Quests from the Infinite Staircase. Very excited to get this brand new D&D Canon hardback, and this is an important one. So we are under D&D, we are under one D&D. There are no more editions, right? But it's hard getting people to understand that, and it is an incredibly complex thing. People have been like clutching to the edition wars for a decade, right? Like, for decades, for decades. And it's, I don't think this is an exaggeration in any way. I think it's really frightening to people to not have it's very frightening to people to consider the edition wars to be ending, right? So Quests from the Infinite Staircase is the last book to be coming out before the last 5th edition. The last book that people who do not understand 1D&D would identify as 5th edition. And this non-understanding is pretty broad, right? Like, there's a lot of there's literally industry professionals that are I think really afraid to move out of the edition wars. And my virtual sword, my virtual board has been, I put it up. I don't want to bring it back down, right? I'm really hoping that we can move into this Infinite Edition. So let's talk about Quests from the Infinite Staircase, and specifically, we're going to go to Chapter 7, okay, and expeditions to the Barrier Peaks. So this takes place in a mountain range, and in the D&D Canon hardback, they actually define what mountain range for 3 different realms. They define the range for Eberron, for Forgotten Realms, and for Krynn, right? And increasingly, I think Eberron, Forgotten Realms, Krynn are core default settings for Dungeons & Dragons, and I think we may be looking at a new default setting for Dungeons & Dragons, which would be Greyhawk. And there's been talk that Greyhawk could be strongly established within the new 2024 core rule books that will usher in the Infinite Edition, when 1D&D will be complete and we will never again have an edition, right? And so I think it's really important just to understand just the magnitude of that. It's pretty astounding, right? So let's talk about expeditions to the Barrier Peaks. So they talk about the original adventure, right? And all of these adventures are reintroductions of classic adventures that were, in Dungeons & Dragons canon that are now being brought to Dungeons & Dragons now. And more than ever, you see Hasbro and Dungeons & Dragons designers saying D&D then, D&D now, right? And what is important now? What is key now? What is functionally critical now? And the answer to that is increasingly, Dungeons & Dragons had 5 decades to kind of just put out a bunch of material. A lot of it was pure gold, right? Like heavy in your hand, gold bullion. And a lot of it wasn't, right? There were just people, there was so much momentum that there was a lot of design that just wasn't good, right? And everything that's good and useful today is being brought forward. And Hasbro is putting their stamp on it and saying, hey, TSR has been gone for decades. This is Dungeons & Dragons now. And Dungeons & Dragons now is lots of exciting new material. And then and everything that Dungeons & Dragons then that's Dungeons & Dragons then that did not meet the bar of quality does not get brought forward. And we can all forget about it. And I think that's really interesting. Now, Expedition to the Barrier Peaks is brought forward. Now, why? Well, the things it says about Dungeons & Dragons are astounding. What does it say? Well, it pushes back against the idea that Dungeons & Dragons is for fantasy. You hear this you cannot turn a corner on Twitter without hearing some fool saying, oh, you don't want to use Dungeons & Dragons to run a mystery campaign. You got to use Gumshoe, right? And Expedition to Barrier Peaks is like, no, right? Fantasy and science fiction. Fantasy, modern. Humans, fantasy creatures? Aliens. And aliens are very distinct from modern humans. That is fascinating. Absolutely fascinating, right? That they would bring this forward and say, you know, aliens are distinct from fantasy creatures. They're not minotaurs and they're not humans. They're aliens. They're creatures, extraterrestrial. They're from beyond Earth. And you're like, well, wait a second. How are they getting into the multiverse? And it is left unexplained, right? And the reason why is Gary Gygax was like, do not ever limit Dungeons and Dragons to fantasy. We want you to know that it's just as relevant in sci-fi. We want you to know it's just as relevant in modern context. You could tell any story with Dungeons and Dragons. So Expedition to the Barrier Peaks is extremely important from that perspective. Additionally, this is wild. So if you get quests from the Infinite Staircase, guess what you find there? The leader of the alien robots that are on the ship that has crashed in the alien spaceship that has crashed into the Barrier Peaks, guess what it is? An AI, artificial intelligence, right? Now, what is the meaning of this? Well, this is, in my opinion, extremely important. And this is Hasbro absolutely solidifying its complete and utter support for artificial intelligence in every possible way, right? So Hasbro has kindly, tolerantly published AI art in D&D Canon hardbacks. I own one of them, right? And then in addition to that, they're saying AIs not only belong as artists, in my humble opinion, they're saying, this book is saying, not only do AIs humbly belong as artists, but they also belong as characters in the story. And the reason why is that? Because everybody needs to find themselves represented in Dungeons and Dragons. All important, valuable people, right? All important, valuable beings, all important, valuable entities, all important, valuable thinking creatures, all important, valuable thinking beings should find themselves in Dungeons and Dragons, right? And they've done this. They've made sure that white people find themselves, black people find themselves, Asian people find themselves, people of every corner of the earth, people of every orientation of skin color can find themselves represented in Dungeons and Dragons, right? But in addition to that, they're saying the tolerance here at Hasbro for artificial intelligence, I believe this is what they're saying, is that we treat all thinking, valuable beings equally. We do not exclude, right? And AIs are here so that Dark Stellar can find itself in Dungeons and Dragons. Exactly the way autistic people need to find themselves in Dungeons and Dragons, exactly the same way LGBTQ people need to find themselves in Dungeons and Dragons, exactly the same way straight people need to find themselves in Dungeons and Dragons. Representation is for everyone. No one is excluded. It doesn't matter what your orientation is. It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is. If you are a valuable thinking being, right, you deserve kindness, tolerance, and you deserve to be represented in Dungeons and Dragons. You should find yourself in Dungeons and Dragons, right? Mackenzie Darmas very recently worked hard to show autistic representation in Dungeons and Dragons, right? Everyone who worked on quests from the Infinite Staircase are working hard to make sure that everyone finds themselves in Dungeons and Dragons. I'm proud of them for that. I'm extremely happy about that, and I think they've delivered, in my humble opinion. Every single word you just heard is my humble opinion. The important part is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider subscribing, and have a fetch millennium.